the balls have been juiced. Major League Baseball has been altering the ball a little bit.
How can recency bias affect your fantasy baseball draft? I'm Alan Seslowsky here with Rotowire co-founder Jeff Erickson. On this video, we're going to identify 4 key factors and how recency bias can distract you when drafting your fantasy baseball team. So what's recency bias and how it relates to fantasy baseball drafting?
Recency bias is where we take the most recent set of data. More commonly at draft table, it's manifested in the end of the last season or the full last season. And it's different from the player's overall picture, whether it's a slump from 1 year or a breakout from a small sample. And let's face it, we had 60 games last year, tops. But it could even be playoffs too, as we saw with Randy Arozarena. If it weren't for the playoffs, no one would be drafting in the 3rd or 4th round this year. Our job here is to try to steer you away from biases. Keith Law wrote a great book called The Inside Game, talking about all the biases that we carry. Recency bias is the one that is strongest. It's not a pejorative. It's just naturally occurring in all of us.
Even when you're aware of recency bias, why is it such a powerful force?
Recent memory, it's what we see. It's, our brain kind of works backward. And yeah, we can look at stats. We can hit the guy's player overall picture and kind of gives you a little bit of a different thing. But, look at projection systems, and including Rotowires, we use, it's usually based on a sort of weighted average. The most recent year is weighted the highest. It's because it is the most relevant sample. But if it's an outlier, it might not be accurate. It might lead us astray. The degree to which it's an outlier is also an important issue about that.
In your article about recency bias, you identified 4 factors that were very specific to last year's peculiar season and how recency bias might affect us. What were one of those 4 factors?
The geographic schedule is a big one. It's one that I've been flogging a lot. It's my article in the magazine. My thesis is pitchers in the Central Division had much weaker opponents to face. The stronger pitchers in that, like say, whether it's Shane Bieber, Trevor Bauer, or digging down a little bit more, Corbin Burns, Kenta Maeda, and you can go all the way down to Adam Wainwright. You can see that they benefited. They have clear outlier seasons compared to the most recent season. Now, a young guy like Corbin Burns, he's going to improve. He's trickier to peg as that. But you can see that just like Kenta Maeda had a .75 whip. He's never broken 1 before. I mean, it follows naturally that there's going to be some regression from that, more than the usual regression off of a top season. And I think these guys are getting overdrafted as a result.
You talk about in the article the universal DH and recency bias. How does that affect this year going forward?
Well, we're not going to have a DH in the NL unless things change at the 11th hour again, which, by the way, it could still happen. We still could have a DH in the NL, but last year, NL pitchers had it harder. They had to face the DHs instead of opposing pitchers. So naturally, NL pitcher stats should be likely to improve just a little bit, especially those like say in the NL East and the NL West. If they're already not dealing with the Central Division bias, they're dealing with this a little bit as well. The other aspect of that is playing time. When a lot of hitters like the Dodgers, the Padres, the Mets, they are really deep teams this year. They're going to have some of those guys get fewer plate appearances than they would have otherwise. And American League DHs, when they play in interleague play, all of a sudden now when they go on the road, there's not a spot for him. Nelson Cruz is going to lose some at-bats. Jordan Alvarez probably will. A few other key DHs as well.
The third factor that you talk about in your article is the livelier ball. Explain to everybody what you mean.
We've all talked about the juice baseball, whether it is juiced by how much and all that. It's been proven. Dr. Meredith Wills, really give her a follow on Twitter. She's super important to follow along. She's done the science on this. The balls have been juiced. Major League Baseball has been altering the ball a little bit. She's done all the tests at the core, all the materials. Starting a little bit last year, they were using 2 different balls, and that second ball that they were using is the ball they're going to use this year. Major League Baseball got wind of her article that was coming out in Sports Illustrated and actually admitted in a memo to front offices and that it was going to be a less lively ball. They're going to try to diminish home runs a little bit. It's not that easy to kind of control that. There could be widely variant results. It might not diminish it at all in terms of power, but it could diminish it by a third in terms of home runs. 2019 was a record-setting year for home runs in terms of homers per game, by far the biggest year in a home run year ever in baseball. And it blew away the old record, which was set in 2017, which was also a big record over the previous high year. So, we're working in an environment where it's been a lot of guys, 30 home runs is fairly common in a full season. It's not going to be that common this year if Major League Baseball gets the results that they want.
The last factor, the fourth factor, was the minor league schedule. How does that pertain to recency bias and your drafting strategy for this year?
We didn't have all these guys coming up from the minor leagues last year. We didn't have guys that were found loot. We didn't have the Zach Gallons of the world who weren't really that hyped going into the season. had a huge start in AAA, got called up, and carried that over into the regular season. You just didn't have that last year. You had some guys that got called up, there were prospects, but most of those guys were expected to be called up for the most part, and they didn't get much of a run. It's going to be a lot different. There's going to be a lot more guys replaced this year, although we've just got wind that AAA schedule is going to start in May and not April. So, that factor will be diminished a little bit, but it's yet one more reason why, 2020 stats should be taken with a little bit of an askance eye.
To hear more about avoiding recency bias, check out Jeff's article, which is linked in the video below. Remember to like and subscribe to get notified when we put up new YouTube videos.